So I'll tell you just a little bit more about me. I was a scout uh, growing up. It was in Cub Scouts. I can tell you, I can still remember how excited I was to join. Came through Cub Scouts. I had a core of really good friends and followed them into Troop 134 in Kearney, Nebraska, is where I grew up. And I say one of the big life-changing experiences for me was when I was 14, went with a crew to Philmont with a couple of my friends and then kids from 4 other troops. And did the long, I can't remember what it was, 10 or 11 days is what we did. But it was an amazing thing to be able to hike through the mountains down there after growing up in the flatlands. And it was a major event in my life and really changed my outlook and sort of broadened my horizon. So it was a key takeaway from that. Of course, then went off to school and did other things, got married, and eventually moved to Seattle. And so my kids were all born out there, but then had an opportunity to move back to the Midwest in Chicago in the early 90s, just about the time my oldest, I think, was just in first grade. The 2 boys weren't in yet. And I got involved as an adult after we moved to Oak Park. And we were getting involved in activities, and my wife was getting really involved in school and everything else to get the kids all set up. And I came home from work to find out I was the new Cubmaster of the Cub Scout pack across the street, because so many people had left. They were in danger of having to fold the pack because there would be no one there to lead it. My wife said, "Well, my husband will do that." So that's how I got started. Except neither of my boys were old enough to be in the pack yet. So that was kind of cool. But I was fortunate in that I had a couple of adults who were Webelos leaders who helped guide me that first year. And then I learned a lot from roundtables and from meeting other people like this. So what I thought I'd do today is I've just sort of lined out, sort of the concepts around building a strong unit committee, which is a good foundation for having a consistent and organized pack and all the activities. And you can see I've just sort of organized it into these bullet points, and I've got a slide for each. But as we go through, this is not really intended to be sort of a presentation. I mean, I can do that, but I don't think we need that. So I would prefer, if there's anything that catches your eye you want to talk about, just go ahead and interrupt me and we'll have that conversation. I think we're going to have plenty of time to get through all the pieces anyway. So if we chop it up a little bit, that'll be just fine. So we're going to go through a little the organization responsibilities, roles, how to run your committee meetings and what you're trying to accomplish. And then the bigger things here is how do you get recruit leaders and get them to stay with the program and really help. And then a few things about, managing and sticking to a calendar, training, and some of the leadership training and team building kinds of things, how to get to know the people that you're working with. So let's go on to the next slide. This, once I did it and stepped back from it, looks kind of daunting. It's just because there's a whole lot of words on it. But basically, it's just a reminder that the committee really is, in a way, like, a board of directors. So it's the entity within the troop that ensures that the tools you need to deliver the program and the support that the Scoutmaster, assistant Scoutmasters need is there. So that's everything from funding to do things to equipment to providing volunteers when volunteers are needed. And that's sort of the basis of what that committee is trying to do. So if you think of it that way, I think it helps to realize that anyone who wants to participate, whether this is the thing you want to devote much of your time to, or whether you can do one thing, there's plenty of room in there to find something that people can contribute to. So the bullet points you can see here, the committee is going to be the main connection to your chartered organization and your chartered organization rep. And particularly from the committee chair, there's some things you're going to do, work very closely with the Scoutmaster. So there's a consistent approach, and that there's a support for the Scoutmaster or Cubmaster, either one, when you have sort of policy issues or other things to sort out that are a little off the beaten path. So occasionally you'll have to deal with behavioral, or you'll recognize that some kids are having a difficult time getting there. If there's a home situation isn't perfect for that. And that's where you can consult with each other and find a way to help solve whatever that issue is and make sure that the scouts are able to participate and enjoy and grow and learn from the program. And so again, the idea of the committee trying to provide the structure within which the Scoutmaster and the rest can really sort of deliver the program. So let's go on to the next one. This is another one. These are all roles in the troop. And if you're in a big troop, you could probably find somebody to fill in each of these roles, and it could be somebody different. But in my pack, when I first started out, we were not very big. We didn't have a Webelos 2 group that year, and we were just starting out. So we had, on a good night, 20. So several of us just divvied up some of these responsibilities. When you have a smaller group like that, you can do advancement and do other things. So it's not as though you need separate people to fill all of these, but there are some that are going to require some commitment of time. For example, the committee chair is going to be involved a lot, just dealing with managing the meetings and recruiting people and all that. But advancement and some of the other kinds of activities, a single person could do 2, 3, or 4 of these kinds of things. What you'll find, though, is that and this is kind of one of the things you're looking for. When I first meet new parents who are bringing scouts into the troop or the unit, whatever it is, often we'll take the kids who are getting ready to join, and we'll get some of the older scouts or certain adults to help work with them to get them involved in a meeting so that we can pull the adults aside to explain to them how this whole process works. And it's good to remind them that even though scouting, for some of us, this is a thing we really like to devote our energy to, remember that we're volunteers too. We all have day jobs, and we probably have kids of different ages. Some are in Scouts, some are graduated. And so it's just a reminder to everybody that it's a volunteer-run organization, and that if there is one thing they can contribute to, we can find a way to help them contribute. And the organization runs best if everybody can do a little bit. So that's sort of a lead in for that kind of thing. You can see as you get more advanced and you have a few more people tackling more complex projects or events, when your unit grows in size and now you're exceeding 40 or 50 or something like that, you're going to need a few more people to help fill out these things. Otherwise, you run the risk of sort of burning yourself out. So some of the things that I've shown are the standard ones, some of the others that are I think critical going forward now is the whole communications or potential webmaster. Especially there, but even units I work with where people are pretty dispersed, just trying to maintain communication. And that's not only distributing or disseminating information, but being available for people to ask individual questions. And so they've got a place to go to contact the troop or the pack or whatever your unit is. And so keeping that communication line open does a couple of things. One, it finds and sort of helps resolve issues quickly. But the other one is that that's starting to build a relationship. And it's through those relationships and understanding what people are interested in that we can help figure out where in the organization their contribution could best be used as part of the committee, or maybe it is as an assistant scoutmaster working with you. And then in addition to the routine things we do, there are often lots of sort of single time events, whether you're doing a blue and gold dinner or an annual troop dinner. Or the big one for me in Cub Scouts was the Pinewood Derby, just recruiting people to help manage that and make sure that it was fun for everybody. But that was sort of a one-time event, and I could get people involved, and it's, a week or a weekend's worth of activities, but it was a big help, and then that was their contribution. And if they were involved in other things, they might not be able to help in other stuff, but if they knew that at the beginning of the year, which goes back to the importance of the calendar, we could sort of block that out and make sure we had the help that we needed to do that. Family picnics or other kinds of trips that you do or events can be the same way, where it's a little easier to recruit someone to focus on that one thing, particularly if it's on the calendar, they know how far out it is. So let's, any questions about that?
Okay, a comment, Jim, that I'll make would have to do with your first sentence there. Some roles require consistent leadership, and like you just said, I think that it's really important for us and for people that were engaging scouting that we are clear, like this is a year-round commitment, or you can help with the fundraiser, great. It's 3 months end to end from organization to done. You could do that and that's your thing. Like, I think that, not considering that everything has to be full-time, if you will, but that some things do. Your den leader is a full year commitment, right? You can't be den leader for a month and then not pay attention to it. But you can do that for your blue and gold dinner, and you can have somebody who just deals with that, and if that's all they can commit. And I think sometimes we think that we got to get people who are going to be, all in 100% of the time, and there's a lot of things that are a lot less than that they don't need to be. So that's just an observation that I have.
Yeah, I think one of the things, just to pull on that a little bit too, especially if you've had to do a number of things on your own, it gets a little difficult sometimes to hand it off, right? Because you know how you'd want it done. And one of the things that you might have to do is you'll have someone who wants to volunteer. They haven't done it, is to try to figure out the right amount of guidance, but not actually do it for them, because that's a good way to lose someone who would otherwise volunteer, right? And there's a bit of an art to that. And so I've been through this a couple of times. And I've had to figure out the right way to stay in connection with someone who's working on an event like that, so it kind of goes the direction I want, but also know the parameters or the lanes I need them to work in. And as long as they're in there, if they want to do it their way and the end result is still okay, it's not the way I would do it, that's fine. So there's a little bit of that in learning how to manage folks, that you get the best out of them and you don't wind up doing everything yourself. But that's a great point. And I think as we get into this, the kinds of things you do at the beginning of the season and the end of the season will help you start to figure out, of all the adults you're working with, which ones are more likely to say this is an area where they'd like to devote more of their time, and others who love the program but just want to do one thing. And part of the trick is figuring out which is which, and we'll talk about that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, committee meetings. So generally, whether it's a pack or a troop, I've done these early in the month before the big events of the month, because it helps us, keep track of what's in front of us, make sure we have the right equipment, the right venue, all of that kind of thing. And also that's a good time to check to make sure we have the right volunteers we need. One of the keys to making that work, I think, is, setting a schedule at the beginning of the year, blocking out the days and times you're going to have the meetings, just like you do for the roundtable. You do the same thing with all these. And unless there's a significant weather event or something like that, you hold the meetings whether you've got, 4 people there or 10, just because that the rigor of doing that gets ingrained, and everybody knows that if the troop meeting's on the calendar, it will happen, or the committee meeting. The other thing is, generally, the committee meetings are open not just to registered adult leaders, but to all parents. So this is a good time for people to kind of see how the operation runs, and for you to get to know who they are. So you want to make sure that you encourage people to attend. Sometimes if you get known as a troop who gets stuff done, you might not get as much participation as you like, because people go, oh, this is great, they just take care of things. But you want to encourage them to participate so they can see how it happens, and you get to know who they are. Back in the days when you used to meet in person regularly, and you're doing a pretty good job here, I see it's always nice to, as you're the leader of the committee and some of the key folks, to be there that 15 minutes early for the kinds of conversations, honestly, that we had, or I listened to as we began the meeting. This is where you kind of find out how everybody's day is going, what's going on this week. And often you'll learn something about each other that someone has an interest you didn't know they had, that would be a great person to help us with a certain activity that we want to do. You don't always find those out sort of in the formal way, but that informal gathering at the beginning, and you'll see at the end, leaving time there as people are breaking up. A lot of times 2 people who volunteered something will connect with each other on the way out the door. And I think that's a big part of it. There's this very much a social aspect to how this works, and connecting people and connecting ideas, that in developing those even on either side of the meeting, where you sort of set things out. Then during the meeting itself, Always take a moment if you've got anyone who's joined new, no matter what time of the year, to welcome them and thank them for participating, and make sure you introduce them to everybody, and they to everybody in the group, make them feel a part of it. And then in operating the meeting, this is always an interesting one because there's a certain amount of discussion that has to happen, and you want to make sure people participate. And sometimes you'll have to manage it to make sure, depending on the size of group you have, that everybody's got a chance to voice what their interests are and to try to move things along. But I will say occasionally you're going to find out that you will have topics where you're just trying to gather information. You're not going to solve it today, but you're sort of getting ready to solve it at maybe the next meeting, the final decision. And I've caught myself sometimes doing this a little too soon and sometimes a little too late when I realized, okay, the conversation's gone around 2 times. Now it's headed the 3rd time we're talking about the same thing. And being able to say, okay, we've got other stuff to talk about. I appreciate it. I've taken all the notes. But usually I do that after I'm pretty sure everybody's had a piece to say, so that the conversation is what's helping driving it forward. But people, this is the tricky part. You're trying to make sure that people feel like not only are they heard, but it's helping move forward, and that some decisions are being made, that it's not just a discussion for discussion's sake. It's actually driving the unit forward with what it wants to do. And then one of the key things to summarize at the end of the meeting, if there are any particular assignments for that month, for the activities of the unit that month, or to prepare for the month ahead, that we've sort of clarified that, and the people who need to work together know who they are, and they've exchanged phone numbers and all that's needed there. So as a committee, that's a big part of making sure that directions are clear and that people know what they're supposed to be doing for the next month. All of this is sort of behind the scenes for the scouts and the troop and for most people, but it's good to get as many people in to see that this is how it happens. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Jim,
go ahead.
Before we move on, quick question.
Yeah.
What do you think is, like, how do you find success in your assignments? Do you do it based on a volunteer method? Is it more, can you do this? Thanks. So is it more like a voluntel? Like, what do you find works best for you to make?
It's going to be a little of both, I think. And to the extent I can, or I could when I was doing it this way, I would try to get, anyone who was interested, I would accept that, right? If someone was really new to the program, but had an interest and wanted to do it, I might match them up with someone in the troop who's got a little more seasoning, right? Who's done this before. They may have other things they're doing, but that would help a new person kind of understand how to do things with a group of kids who are between, whatever ages they are, 11 and 15 or something like that. And I found people often really want to participate, but need a little guidance because they're not used to putting things together for groups of kids that age, and certain things work and certain things don't. So the idea one is trying to match somebody new with somebody seasoned. And so the someone new often is a volunteer, and the someone seasoned is a little bit of voluntold. I need your help on this to make sure it goes right. But I need their help, not so much to do it as to guide this person as to how to do it. So that person will not only succeed for the troop, but now becomes more aware of what works with a unit, whether it's for a meeting or a specific special event, and then will be a better volunteer the next time they come around because now they get the program. So that would be one way I do it. Occasionally, through this sort of beginning and ending meetings and some of the other things, I'll know that could be a new younger adult that's just joined, not a lot of experience, but I'll know they have a special knowledge or interest in something. And it may be some outdoor activity we want to do. And this person is a birder or something like that. And they may be a little on the shy side. So I might pull them aside ahead of time and say, we've got this thing I think you'd be really good at. Would you be interested? And kind of pull them in that way. And I might match them up with my normal, the person who does a lot of nature stuff as a way to pull them in. And that's where the advantage of having these informal conversations, I'm not actually writing it down, but kind of putting it up here. Oh, this person might be good for this. You're sort of evaluating people's capabilities. And you can usually tell where they'd be okay to do something, but they wouldn't volunteer. But if you asked them, they probably would. But that idea of matching them up with some of my more seasoned folks is good. It's what turns them into the next group of seasoned people. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that was good clarification.
I got one more point I'm going to ask you to talk about a little, Jim, and it has to do with that the process should not be too rigid. You know, a lot of committees, I think, get hung up on this incorrect belief that the committee is like a governing voting body and we have to have a majority vote on everything. And the reality is it's not, and it's a consensus group. So talk a little about that in your experience of, you know, that at the end of the day, the committee's a consensus group. It's not a majority rule group. So
Correct.
talk a little about that.
Yeah. The Cub Scout committee is a good one. My first experience with this, the Boy Scout one was a little more interesting, just because there were people who knew the public rules and things, and so it was they weren't serious about it, but it was kind of a joke that I wasn't doing it quite right. But that is the point. This is a discussion body, and in a way, it's really an advisory body. You don't have to vote on everything. I think what's important is, Terry's pointing out, you're building consensus, and this is where managing the discussion is really important, and hearing the voices at the table and those who are calling in. So I will often look around the table to make sure if I haven't heard from someone, I'll try to figure out how to get them involved in the conversation without sort of, pointing them out. But also, if I've heard from the same person who said the same things 3 times now and is sort of dominating the conversation, I'll sort of gently move away and say, yeah, that's a great point. I think we got that one. Who else wants to join in? So as a committee chair, you're trying to manage the conversation and make sure you're getting all the input you need. And so, we don't need to vote on a lot of things. Generally, when the committee has, you can tell the direction the conversation's taking it. Sometimes as the chair to move it forward, I'll say, I think what I'm hearing from the group is that we should organize it this way. And we've got a volunteer lead, and I probably need one more. Can anyone else do that? And if I've got that, I'll say, I think this is a good direction to go. Does anyone disagree? It's another way to use the conversation or the opportunity for discussion to sort of settle this is how we're going to do it, rather than going to a raised hand vote, which for the majority of things we don't need that. We're just trying to get a single event launched or a certain support activity launched. So I think if you think of it as a good conversation and discussion, it's just a little more managed to get through a series of topics, rather than the Robert's Rules of Order. I need a motion and a second for everything we talk about. You don't need to do that. Again, everybody should be easily approachable, right? That's what we're after. Okay, let's go on to the next one then. Okay, this is a good one. And this has sort of evolved over time as we've learned, and certainly I did a number of these kinds of things when Terry and I were in the same troop together. But these are the kinds of things, sort of special events where you get to meet new parents, new adults who are bringing their kids into the program. And so we would have specific recruiting nights, for example, but a big part of that was not only what we're doing for those who want to join the troop or the unit, but also for the parents. So we could do a little orientation with them and say, here's how this works. And they would find out about us and where we came from and why we're involved. And that's the start of building a relationship with them to find out what their interests are. We found people who were very quiet who turned out to be Eagle Scouts and have been to Philmont, and they probably have something they could offer, right? And others who've never been in but have heard about it, are really excited about it, want to find a way to participate. And so this is the start of that process. That's part of the recruiting, the visits to the unit. And then when the actual registration occurs, we then give another opportunity to do the same thing. There have been years, and this is depending on the size of the troop, this is not difficult to do, where we have a special, parents meeting. and really like to get all the parents of the scouts in the unit together just for that group to explain again how it works. But we also have done sort of sign-up sheets, which can be in person or you can do it online, that says, what are your areas of interest? What do you think you could do? And we've often laid out things like, we've got a lot of kids and we need people just to drive kids to campouts and drop them off. And if you committed to one of those a year, you'd be doing us a great service. Or some people who like planning events. And we tried early in the year to kind of get a list of who might be interested in what kinds of things, so that each time an event comes up, we've got someone we can contact. Would they be available? Would they be interested? So that's the start of that. Then weekend campouts. This is, or whatever your weekend events are, is trying to make sure that any new adults, that you encourage them to come along. Of course, you got to make sure they're registered and all that for the campout kinds of events, but encourage them to come along. And certainly with the scouting that does a lot of camping, we let the scouts operate as their own patrols, right? They're their own patrols and they do their own thing. We monitor, but we stay out of their way so they can learn from what they're doing. And the adults can kind of operate separately as their patrol. And obviously we're involved in advancement and all the kinds of things during the day with the scouts. But there's also time in between there for the adults to get to know each other more and talk a little more about the program, but also about what are the other things that they're interested in. What do they like to do? Do they have other kids? Are they from there? All those kinds of things that are helpful to know, to get to know each other, and makes it easier to ask someone to help down the road if you know them. That way you're not talking cold. So those are all opportunities to engage people and get to learn who they are and what they can do. And then I think, there's the celebratory events. So having a picnic in end of August or September at the start of the year to invite everybody in and kind of celebrate whatever happened over the summer, whether people went to high adventure camps or to week scout camps and earned merit badges, or just anything that they did, have a celebration. And again, this is just a get together, potluck kind of barbecue, but it's a great opportunity to celebrate the achievements, but also to have discussions with all the other adults and start to put together your plan for the year, who you might ask. And then field questions from folks too. Just be available. I think that's the other thing. If you do have a leadership role and this is your thing, always being available to any of the other adults. So those are good ones. And then depending on how you do it, the troop I was with, we would do a court of honor at the in December at the end of the fall sort of session and celebrate all the achievements and rank advancement there. And the court of honor itself, if we did it relatively slowly, it still took maybe half an hour is all. And then we had time afterwards where we would have, juice, cookies, that sort of thing, and invite everybody to stay. So we had a chance to catch up with everybody else. And we do that then and at the end of the year. So always be looking for these kinds of things that would cause people to hang around a little bit longer and to celebrate the achievements and to build the relationships with everybody in the troop that you need to advance the organization. So there's that. I think the other thing too is with your committee, particularly the core of the committee, in addition to the pre-meetings and post-meetings, probably most of your units do. There's going to be a core of a handful of people, a half a dozen or so, who you can count on and get a lot done. And of course, over time, you'll need to be adding to that group as others move on. And so, it's a good thing after a committee meeting or occasionally go out and have some pizza together. Have a beverage of your choice. Get together and visit about a lot of things and get to know each other really well so that the organization can advance and it's easier to pull people into it. So any of those kinds of sort of fellowship events, really compare notes and get to know each other. And you'll find out who's dealing with elderly parents right now and maybe would love to join but can't. Things like that are important to know. It helps you know the total person that you're working with and not just a scouting version of them.
So Jim,
Other thoughts on that?
Sorry. So I have a quick question, just based on feedback I've heard from a lot of the adult leaders here. And just in the district as a whole.
Yeah.
What would you say, because it sounds like one of the bigger issues is more getting an adult to commit and register in the first place versus then having them assign a role. Because if they register, they care enough, they want to participate. It's more you have parents coming to a Cub meeting. How do you then engage those parents who aren't registered, but they obviously care enough to stay at the meeting?
Mm-hmm. What I used to do was, depending on the nature of the meeting and the program, almost all of it could be helped with a little extra adult supervision, right? So I might just pick somebody who's there as a parent because we're all in the gym together, right? I said, you could really help me if you go over there and watch this activity that they're doing for me. It's not much. They're there anyway, but it shows that I'm interested in them and that I think they can help us. And so I would pull people in to do this. And it could be, oh gosh, I have to think back, but there was a meeting where we were in the gym and everybody had a pile of cardboard and they were trying to figure out how to make a cardboard toboggan that they could pull across, the gym floor. And we're going to race each other. This is Cub Scouts. And so we had them broken down into smaller groups. And so great. If I've got 6 different groups lined up, I might 6 different parents to kind of observe and watch. And, if they needed help to advise or things like that, but they would be parents. They wouldn't necessarily be registered with the troop, but they were there at the meeting with a bunch of us who were registered, and I could just have them watch what's going on and make comments. So any of those kinds of small things is a way that I'd start to pull people in. I think in Boy Scouts, it's a little bit different and above just because of all the camping. So now to participate in camping, you're probably going to have to, you're going to have to register folks to do that. So that'll change that dynamic. I'm not sure how that will, play out, whether we're going to be short of people for a while, perhaps because people don't want to register. But the other thing is back to the committee meetings, these other events, anything as a parent they can participate in, you want to pull them in and have them show up and make sure you have a chance to talk with them. And, 2 or 3 discussions about and seeing how the organization works, maybe have that conversation then. It could be halfway through the year and said, there's more that I think you could do. You don't have to do a lot, but to do the 1 or 2 more things, probably a good idea to register and kind of ease them into it. So it's sort of recognizing they have the ability where they think so or not, and that it isn't a commitment to show up for everything all year, even with registering, and helping show them how that could happen. So it's a long-winded kind of way to do it, but that's what I did in the past to get people more involved in Cub Scouting. And ultimately through that process, I would recognize 1 or 2 who were kind of hanging back, but they wound up being den leaders for me down the road because they got hooked on it. And so you do it by asking them to do little things, but not too much until they're ready for it, and then they'll recognize it. Not everybody, but enough.
I also have 2 more questions that were typed in. One regarding the committee meeting, but it kind of relates, where people aren't willing to involve themselves or share their opinion, or they're not even staying for the meeting. It's a drop off at 6:15, start promptly, leave an hour later, promptly after the meeting. So how do you work to engage those people?
I think one of the things that I tried to do when I sort of recognized those would be, can't always catch everybody at the beginning of the meeting, but sometimes I catch them at the end. And so, if you're running the meeting, you're there all the time, you start to know the kids pretty quickly and you know who their parents are. And so I might approach, and have done this, a parent that does a drive and drop off, and just to let them know, hey, had a great time tonight. Your daughter had a really wonderful time, and this is the kind of stuff we did. If you're interested, come and see me, because you don't have to do a lot, but maybe you could help me with one of these meetings. So again, part of that's, in a way, what's difficult about some of the roles that we have is you're constantly, if you're like me, you're constantly counting heads, right? You're always trying to make sure I got the right number of heads this high off the floor, so I got those covered. But I'm also keeping track of all the adults. and knowing who's going to be there regularly, who's going to come up and ask a question or just say hi, and who I need to go follow and catch up with at the end of the meeting. But the end of the meeting is a good time because if you're a leader in there, most of what you're required to do that night is now completed. And so now you can go track somebody down and say, hey, I just want to chat with you a little bit. That was what I did.
Okay. Do any of you have any questions or input at all? I feel like
You're doing a good job.
He's doing a good job. I mean, he's covering everything that we've talked about in the past as needing cover, or, help.
Well, I'll tell you, there were, like a lot of the stuff, it was when I sat down to write it out, I recognized, there's a lot of mistakes in there that I had to learn and do 2 or 3 times to figure out, hey, this could actually kind of work if I do it this way.
Well, and I think in general, and Dan, maybe to answer the question that was in the chat there, is it doesn't happen accidentally, right? Like you thinking in your head that you want people to help is not going to cause people to help. And I think to Jim's point is to be intentional about it. And sometimes maybe demanding, but hopefully in a positive way. Like Cub Scouts, like, hey, parents are supposed to stay, so we need you to stay. Start with that. Just as a thought. So, but it doesn't happen accidentally.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And like I say, after a bit, you kind of learn to scan the room and figure out who's who, and you might have to tailor your approach a little bit to get someone more engaged and involved. But again, it took a while to get used to this. Was feeling like it was okay for me to approach people if I didn't know them to ask. And it is. I mean, people sort of know that that's there. They're probably dropping off and going away because they're afraid they're going to get asked to do something. Well, you will, but it won't be that much. You don't have to do everything. We just need your help a little bit.
Yeah. Which would you? So I know your troop did some onboarding for new parents, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, one of those was the expectation that as a parent you will help out, but it might vary whether you're not everybody's going to be an assistant scoutmaster or whatever, but some might be hey, you're going to do this one thing and that counts,
Yes. So as you say that, I remembered something I almost forgot to note was we did this last number of years at our troop dinners, but you could do it at a blue and gold banquet too. That I would keep track of who all had done things, everyone from, the assistant scoutmaster to the loyal committee members who were there for everything, down to the person who drove a carload out to a camp out one time because we really needed that. And at the troop dinner, I would lay out all of the people, and I didn't say specifically what they did other than that they contributed to make the program work. And I'd read off all lists of names and I'd have them stand up, and so the 4 who were left sitting down, it's like, hey, you still got an opportunity here. But the whole idea is that if you do keep track of that, it'll be surprising to people how many even contribute that one thing. And of course, that one thing is important. And that's a good time to go back to the room and say, look, this works as a program because of all of you standing up, not just because I'm standing here. And so that kind of reminder, particularly at that time when you're not all the way through, but you're well into the season and there's still opportunities to volunteer, sometimes we'll encourage people to step up and say, yep, I should be a part of this. I'm getting the benefit of the work of all of these people. So that's a good reminder, and that's a good way to do it because it can be done quickly. You don't get into the detail of it, but it just, everybody recognizes if you stand up, you did something to help the troop do an event at some point in the year. Okay, is that helpful?
Yep.
Okay, let's see here. Where are we now? Okay. Yeah, these are just all about the communications, really. And I think if I could pick one thing, the troop calendar is just really key. You set your meetings at the beginning of the year. You're not always going to have the topics for all the meetings. You just need to see far enough advance. But if the meeting's on the calendar at a date and time, it's going to happen on that date and time, no matter how many or how few show up. And that's really important because, you liken it to all the sports that kids get into, or maybe they're in band or something like that. If there's a call practice, you got to show up, and there's no expectation you're going to play in the game if you don't, right? So all we're saying is this is no different. If you want to get something out of the program, you need to appear and be there. And to do that, we're going to make sure we as the volunteer adults are going to appear and be there every time too. So you get that out and published, and then it's reliable. So now when you ask an adult to do something, you can start to look ahead and say, well, we've got this planned on this date. I could use a little help on that date, right? So that's a key thing. But then reminders, the monthly newsletter, however you do that through the year. And that might have the occasional change of venue, but rarely a change in date and time. And I can't even count on one hand. It would be fewer, almost not even on one hand, the amount of things that either got canceled or changed substantially in 20 years. We just, if it's put together right, I think there's a rigor to that people appreciate that. Then there are the special events and constant communication. I think the big thing is I was getting down to here, though, whether it's the troops website or other mechanism, is this is not just a pushing out of information, it's a receiving of information too. So that there is a place to go when parents have a question or a comment or something else they think you need to know, that this can come in from that direction as well. And that there's somebody monitoring that who recognizes this is a question we want to get back on. So it's not all about at the meeting or at the committee meetings, but there's another form of communication here. We'll have some scouts whose parents have jobs that require them to travel, so they can't be there a lot and they need to rely on this, or scouts too who spend time with mom on this week and dad on that week, and we got to recognize all those different possibilities and try to make it as easy as possible for people to stay connected with what's going on in the troop and support their child who's in it. So that's really sort of the gist of what I wanted to get to there, and then you can see all the detailed stuff of that. I'm just looking at the chat about the website private. Terry, do you want to talk about that? Because you really helped put ours together about how to manage that. You know better than I do.
Yeah, I don't think a website needs to be private, but you need to make sure that the information protects privacy. So on our troop website, we never use the last name of Scouts. I think the only email address that we post on there is the general troop email address. That way people aren't getting junk and spam, to their personal things. So we keep it public just because I think when you password protect things, that people are less likely to probably view them, but you just need to be cognizant then of what information is being shared on there. The calendar, if you had a website with nothing else but a live calendar that was accurate, like a Google calendar, and you had nothing else to the website, and maybe an email address that people can contact, I think that in and of itself is 80% of the war in terms of communication. The rest is good gravy.
Yeah, I'd say the one thing about that as well is that if you have this, the people who can post or do things with that should be a very narrow couple of people, so that you really are controlling the content that goes on there. So that would be the other key to that. That way you're sure the calendar is correct, and that if you post some photos, it's a good selection and appropriate for showing troop activities.
Yeah, I think the importance of, I know a lot of units, specifically here, often have like a private Facebook or, a group chat that has more of that, hey, this is a reminder about the meeting tonight, that kind of thing. But I also, and glad you brought up the public side, I think it's important as well to have a discoverable area where you can post cool pictures of the things you do, or hey, this is where and when we meet, and this is our primary point of contact if you're interested in joining, that kind of deal. So I think that public side is very important, even just from a recruiting aspect.
Absolutely, I was going to agree. Yep.
I'm also glad you brought up the communication aspect, because I think that is, I forget if it's the first or second reason, but it is one of the top 2 reasons why people end up leaving a unit, is because they signed up and then missed a meeting, and then never heard from anyone again. So I think it's important to have that, this is where we go for that information. This is our calendar, so yeah, it's a holiday, we're taking a break, but we are starting back up this day. So like, for example, the PACs, a lot of them move from, you know, weekly meetings to monthly activities in the summer. Having that, this is the normalcy date already set. So like on August 16th, we go back to normal meetings every week.
Well, and it's both the passive communication and the active. So, you know, the email newsletters or the, you know, whatever, if you use a chat function, you know, or chat app of some sort, but then also the passive stuff. So like perfect example is I saw Troop 16's Facebook had a post yesterday that said, parents, check your emails. You got information on summer camp today, due by whatever. So it's like Facebook post about an email you're getting, right? So it's like, and it hits both sides of it. So it's kind of both methods, the passive and the active, I think that.
Yeah, which I'm glad you bring that up, because I mean, how many of you unit wise, when you come back from like a break or the summer or something, you know, generally have less people showing up right after the break, which I believe is the, you know, most of the case. I believe that active, you know, hey, notice you haven't come to a meeting lately. We're still meeting here. I'd love to have you back.
Or Happy New Year. We're
yeah.
starting up, school's starting up. We're on meeting on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah, just hey, this is our upcoming events. We'd love to have you come back. You know, we're no longer on the break. Just get them back in the habit of coming to the meetings, I think is important.
Right. And you can see where the dates you post, that's as you think through the calendar to the greatest degree possible to stick to those, because sometimes people will look at that calendar we publish and that's what they'll look at. They don't get, you know, and this is the other thing we're finding too. Some people look at email, some aren't looking at it anymore, not like they used to, you know. Younger generation, they're all texting each other or IMing or things. And so having multiple ways to communicate, but it's consistent in what the information's going out, but trying to cast in that widely. And I think too, as we said, the feedback part of that is important too, making sure there's an opportunity for someone to ask a question to get caught up. So that's good. Okay. Oh, next one is registration. And again, as we talk, invite all parents, regardless of whether they're registered or not, to your committee meetings. Sometimes it's a good pathway to get them registered. And often what we'll do with people who are just joining us, get them registered as a committee member. It's you can take committee member specific training. That's sort of the basic, along with everybody is required with the YPT, but this is the only additional, and it's not difficult. It's just sort of an orientation. So it's a pretty easy way to get in and get connected with the program, and a good place to start people to grow. And then there is, and Terry, maybe you want to talk about this a little bit, the unit scout or reserve is another option for those who want to participate, but can't be consistent, whether they travel, whatever the reasons are. But at least it gets them registered in the program. And then for those who are really active and we know, and they know that they like doing the outdoor activities and are good at teaching knots, fire building, whatever, and they're going to be someone who engages that way. You know, assistant scoutmaster is a good role for someone like that.
Is there a difference in cost?
not in many of those. Yep.
No, I think it's just the issue is the commitment to training. So committee member is pretty straightforward. Unit reserve is really, not much. And then the assistant scoutmaster, that's going to require a little more. But you will have people who are interested, if they've got a scouting background, have been looking forward to the day when their kids are in, maybe this is a good thing. A lot of times I'm trying to remember, I probably was a committee member for a year or so, and then assistant scoutmaster as I moved from Cub Scouts into Boy Scouts. So committee members, I'm looking at the chat. Do committee members need to be registered? You should have a core committee with members who are registered, but that doesn't mean that everybody who participates in a committee meeting needs to be registered. They can be parents and join in the meeting and voice their interests and participate in the discussion. But you'd like to have a core of those that you've got at least a handful of folks who are registered members of Scouting and can participate that way. So you would have, the committee chair, and then of your committee members, you can divvy up sort of the leads for the other roles that happen that happen there. And then, as I said earlier, if somebody is showing up to meetings pretty regularly and they're not registered, that might be a little discussion off to the side. Says, you're here all the time, why don't you get registered? That would really be helpful to us, and you'd probably enjoy it more too. Okay.
Real quick too, I also want to point out that unit Scout or Reserve is also a great opportunity for like if you have those 18-year-olds who are now away at college, but they come back and they still want to be registered with like Order of the Arrow, or they still want to come up and, help out with the troop at summer camp, that kind of stuff. That's a great opportunity because then they don't negatively impact your, training, because other than youth protection, there's no requirement there, but it still allows them to feel that they're registered with the troop role, so they can still stay overnight and that kind of stuff.
Right. And that can be really handy for sometimes special events or even high adventure, where I've had people who are very connected, but just, not around, but fully capable and continually registered with the troop. And so it's great to have that resource if you need it. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, this kind of covers a little bit, but again, back to the social activities and finding things, whether you do picnics or you do barbecues. I used to do, for example, end of summer barbecue in my backyard for all the adults who had been, significant leadership roles, whether that was during the year or spent time at summer camp or led high adventure trips. But it was just a recognition in that case for the group who put in a significant amount of time to make the troop go and allowed us to do some of the special activities. And it was just a time to get together to sort of trade stories about the summer and to find out what other vacations people had and all that. But that kind of event just sort of builds a stronger, cohesive group. You understand each other better, who you can count on, and clearly who's got what interests and what that you can now pull on through the year. So that's a good thing to do. Anything, like I said, the beginning of the summer, end of the summer, sort of celebration, picnics, events that include all the family. So it's not just the Scouts and their parents, but any siblings, all are welcome. Again, those are great opportunities, not just for the leadership to talk to the adults, to the parents, but for the parents to be talking to each other. Sometimes you'll find that you'll have new parents, some who've got a lot of experience and some don't, who start to pull each other along. So, you're looking to create an event like that probably, every couple of months. So if you do beginning of summer, end of summer, you do something in the middle of the year around a court of honor. We do something at the troop dinner or the blue and gold. You can see that you get 4 or 5 of these things during the year, and you're never more than 3 months away from doing one. And those are great opportunities to pull people in and to make sure all the adults get to know each other. And I will say that we've had adults who've never been registered, but I could absolutely count on when I needed something. I was short a driver for a camp out, or we had a car breakdown. This happened, and I needed to get someone up there, and I'd call this mom, and she'd say, "Sure, yeah, I've got a van. I'll go up and get them." Right? So you need people like that. It didn't volunteer for anything, but was always there if you really needed it. And these things will help you figure out who those people are. They'll tell you, and you can tell. So not everybody needs to be a committee member, be heavily involved to be very helpful to the troop. And these are good ways to find out about it. And then, like I say, for those for whom this is the major volunteer activity in their life, getting together after the meetings to have a pizza and a beer, or to have a picnic together, or do things like that where you sort out certainly some Scout business you want to deal with, but you also get to know each other, your interests beyond that. And all of that ultimately is not only good for you, it will help drive the troop forward. So all of those events, like I said, it's a big part of what makes that go. Remembering, this is what we're trying to get our patrols to work like. We want them to sort of behave this way, where they get to know each other well. And out of a group of Scouts in there, you're obviously going to have some who are exceptional at some things, but almost always there's somebody in that group. Everybody in that group does something a little better than the others. And this is always revealed to be why I like the high adventure. It was always the case. There was always a small kid who could do something the others couldn't, or something like that. But it's that cohesiveness as they really get to learn each other. And through how they operate together, they find their individual strengths and their strengths as a group. So in a way, what we're trying to find here is ways for the adult to participate and get that same benefit out of it, whether they knew they were coming in for that or not. So that's what these events really help us do. And it's a good model for, how the patrol method works. So other than talking specifically about them, I think, is that the last slide?
Yes.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't have any more to talk about. So anyway, that's what I got.
I have one more thing I want you to talk about for
Okay.
less than 4 minutes.
Okay.
An annual budget for the unit and why that's important to go through the process of budgeting for the year.
Yes, right. Good point. So this is a significant activity of the committee, and this is a budget for guidance. It's not an audited budget or anything like that, but it sort of sets the stage for the committee to understand a couple of things. One, when you do fundraising, where the money goes and why it's important to have this money, and how it helps support the program. And so this is a role, the finance person, the treasurer. Again, this is like the committee chair and the Scoutmaster. These people are committed for this, at least for that year. And if you're lucky, they want to hang with it for a couple of years. But we use it as a guideline to help us understand, well, what do we need to charge for certain things? If we do fundraisers, you'll have an estimate in there based on previous year's experience as to how much you can raise as a unit, and then the kinds of things you need to spend that on. So you will have a chunk that needs to go to, some of the gear that you might need for a camping program. You'll also need that to support specific activities in your meetings. And so this is a way to understand how much those things cost, but also to realize you'll have to craft programs that can kind of fit within that. And there are lots of things you can do on a budget, but you need to sort of stay within that because it allows you to do other things. So when we do special events, and the troop did one just a week ago, a ski trip. And so it's kind of a big deal, in part because it's an opportunity for those who have skied, they have a great time. For those who haven't, this is their first time doing it. Well, the troop wants to encourage these kinds of things, these opportunities for scouts that they might not otherwise have. So, a little bit of the funds in the budget are set aside to help support that. It doesn't pay for all of it, but it knocks the edge off a little bit. So it's very competitive. So, you build the budget with that in mind about how to, even for programs we have to charge more for, or a separate fee for, how to keep that fee low. And that's got to be built in there. So it's important to keep track of that, to see how the money flows in and out, and to stay toward the budget, as well as seeing what you need to do in your fundraising. And if the fundraising falls short, and if you're doing that early in the year, you could see, okay, I might have to modify as we go through, so that you're responsible and responsive to the issues that are happening that year. So that's a key thing you usually do in the first couple of months of the season.
Cool. Perfect. Are there any other questions at all for Jim? Cool. Well, thanks, Jim, for taking the time.
Sure.
I know it's getting late over there on the East Coast, but thanks for taking the time to share your information with us.